God-given free will. Why did God give us free will? Because you can't have true love without the freedom of the will. We can use our free will any way we choose, even to jump off a cliff if we wish, just like the guy in the picture behind me. Not something I would do, but if I wanted to, I have the free will to do that. But there might be consequences. I could jump off that cliff into the water and land not correctly and hurt myself severely. Or I could jump off the cliff, land in the water correctly, and it'd be exhilarating. A relationship with God can be exhilarating. But to have a relationship with God, we have to use our free will that He gave us to say yes. For no relationship can exist unless both parties say yes. In my book, A Mechanic's Handbook to the God of the Bible, Why God Just Makes Sense, Chapter 4 talks about free will and love. It talks about the consequences of not following God and the benefits of following God. Enjoy the chapter. Thank you.
Chapter 4. Free Will and Love. You cannot have true love without the freedom of the will. Free will gives us the opportunity to love freely. I am not talking about some of the crazy ideas people have about love in some elements of society today, or the short-term ooey-gooey love feelings at the start of a relationship, or the selfish one-way love which seems to influence a lot of today's relationships. No, I am talking about imitating God's way of loving His virtue, showing compassion, keeping promises, selflessness, putting others above yourself, respecting and valuing others, and protecting the very sanctity of love and life. That is what true love is supposed to look like. Also, freedom is indispensable to love, and God's supreme goal for you and me is that we will love Him with all of our hearts and love our neighbors as ourselves. For Him to violate our free will removes the necessary component for love to flourish and be freely expressed. Ultimately, the choice we make for eternity is made by the submission of our will to our Heavenly Father. He will not violate our will. That freedom is given to us by Him. Love is an act of the will, not just a feeling. A preacher friend once said, "Love is not a feeling, it's an act of the will. If you fall out of love, will yourself back into love." That has been the truest statement I have ever heard. And many times over the years, I have done exactly that. Willed myself back into love. Many distractions come with the busyness of life, and those distractions can sever a loving relationship. Add in selfishness, and the heart can grow cold. When this comes to light, an act of will is needed to get up and resume the job of loving again. If we are going to love someone or follow God only by feelings alone, what a bumpy ride that will be. At the first sign of turbulence in either relationship, out the door we go. Just because we have the freedom to leave when things get rough doesn't mean that we should. Taking the easy way out disregards the fact that freedom should equal responsibility. To work at a marriage, to work at following and serving God, and to work at making proper decisions that benefit others and ourselves for good. Any freedom that this world has ever achieved has always come at the cost of great human suffering. Spiritual freedom is no different. It was bought by Jesus' suffering on the cross. The difference between the world's freedom is that it can be very short-lived, and history has proven that many times over, whereas spiritual freedom offered by Jesus Christ is everlasting. When it comes to our freedoms, if not used wisely, freedom to choose how we live and how we act can cause many problems. Our society today disregards God and His teaching on many levels, deeming them outdated and irrelevant. Everyone seems to be going in his or her own direction, and this causes much havoc throughout the world. I have heard this comment more than once. What's wrong with the world today? Many say if God was a loving God, then why are things so out of control? If we are following God's precepts, rules to the letter, and then things went south, only then could we take issue with Him over the state of the world. However, shaking an angry fist and blaming Him for our inability to do what is ethical just doesn't seem right. The ones that shake an angry fist at God are able to do so only because God gives all of mankind the freedom to exercise his or her free will. But the result of using that free will not to worship God is laid out in Romans 1 verse 21, which says, "Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God, or even give him thanks. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused." So, we can use our free will any way we choose. But as I have found in my life, choosing God's will over my will brought peace, direction, and meaning into my life. But what about those who refuse to honor God? In his book, The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis says there are two kinds of people in this world. Those who bend their knee and say to God, "Your will be done," or those who refuse to bend their knee to God, and God says to him or her, "Your will be done." And we can all see what following our own will has done in this world. You can say, "Mike, it's not that bad. You're being negative or pessimistic." Yes, and that is easy to do. Just watching the news makes me that way. But the point is, imagine if everyone followed God's will and love your neighbor as yourself. What a transformation that would be. Crime, world hunger, weapons of war, and many other hurtful things would be non-existent. So, is it God's fault or ours for the way things are? Free will, when not used properly, can cause problems. What would it look like if God restrained our free will, seemingly for the benefit of others? Whose free will would be restricted the most? Remember, we would not see the other side of the coin. We wouldn't know what that person was going to do before their free will was taken from them. In the same way, the mistakes we make help us learn. If our free will is restrained because someone may get hurt, the person getting hurt could lose out on learning a valuable lesson on how to forgive. A lesson that will certainly benefit them their entire life. On the other hand, the person who did the hurting might lose out on learning a very valuable lesson. Hurting anyone comes with a cost. And that lesson will also benefit them their entire life. Restraining our free will overall would be unfair. Yes, it would take the bad out of society, but it would also take away our freedom to do good, removing the will of the Spirit. Our spirit motivates us to survive in the face of challenges, to love, to overcome, to be who we are, and to serve God or not. Yes, free will has its negative and positive effects, but we can't be anything more than a robot without it. Because I love my kids, I have had to let them make mistakes so that they could learn. I have had to let them exercise their free will in order to mature. When they were young, I sometimes had to step in for their own safety or benefit. But when I stepped in when they were older, it just caused problems, and their learning curves were stifled. No, God did not make robots. He made man with the free will to choose to love and follow him or not. But free will and our sinful nature have made a mess of things. Why is that? The next chapter on sin gives us a good idea of why.